There was a time when he could still feel the warmth of the sun. Before the curse. Before the fire became his blood, and the chains his conscience. Now, only the roar of the engine keeps him company, a mechanical heartbeat echoing in the hollow chest of a man long since condemned. The desert stretches endlessly before him, an ocean of black sand and smoke. The horizon trembles with heat and judgment. Every sound of the motorbike feels like a hymn to vengeance, every flicker of the flame a whisper from hell. Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance, rides not because he chooses to, but because the fire inside him refuses to rest. He is both executioner and prisoner, and tonight, his flames burn for one final hunt. The night air is heavy with the stench of gasoline and guilt. He tracks a murderer across a ruined city, the skyline lit by the smoldering remains of humanity's arrogance. Neon signs flicker like dying stars, rain sizzles as it touches his skull. Each drop of water turns to steam before it dares to cool the fire. He doesn't speak, he doesn't need to. The souls of the damned scream for him. When the sinner turns to run, Ghost Rider's chain lashes out a burning serpent of judgment. The metal wraps around flesh and bone, igniting it from within. The sinner screams, but the rider's eyes burn brighter. He lifts the man, forcing him to stare into the abyss of his own deeds. The penance stare. Every sin, every act of cruelty, every moment of selfish pleasure reflected back upon the soul tenfold. The man's eyes melt as he chokes on the memory of his own cruelty. When the body falls, there is nothing left but ash. The spirit of vengeance breathes in the silence that follows. But this time, the silence feels wrong, too deep, too alive. It begins as a vibration, a low hum that doesn't come from the earth, nor from the bike. The flames around him flicker unnaturally, bending towards something unseen. The horizon splits like a wound, bleeding light the color of madness. A voice calls out from within the storm. It is not Satan, not Mephisto, not even God. It is older, hungrier, and it knows him. Rider of the damned, you burn well. Come, let your fire meet the infinite. The ground fractures. Reality twists. He tries to resist, revving the hell cycle until sparks rain like meteors, but the world itself begins to unravel. Streets stretch like veins, buildings collapse inward, and gravity loses its meaning. He can feel the pull not downward, but sideways, into something beyond comprehension. The sky turns crimson, and stars die screaming. The warp. The psychic storm of a million damned souls, an ocean of thought, pain, and corruption. The rider's engine howls against it, a defiant roar of infernal steel. But even the fires of hell tremble before the warp. He remembers pain, not the kind that sears flesh, but the kind that unmakes. His chains dissolve into molten light, his bones burn into symbols, his skull stretches into infinity. Countless whispers invade his mind, each voice demanding something different: serve, kill, burn, obey. He sees visions, a golden corpse seated upon a throne of decay, endless wars fought for gods who never speak, and galaxies drowning in their own blood. He sees demons made of thought and soldiers made of faith. Then, the light consumes him. When the fire dies, he finds himself kneeling in silence. The sand beneath him is red. The sky above is black. And across the horizon lie the carcasses of titanic ships, their hulls torn by time and madness. The air is thick with static and incense. The world hums with the residue of psychic death. He has arrived somewhere far beyond his cursed earth, somewhere where even hell hesitates to tread. He stands, feeling the unfamiliar gravity pressing upon his bones. The hell cycle reforms beside him, rising from molten soil like a summoned beast. Its wheels spin in defiance. Though there is no road here, only ruins and screams carried by the wind. Ghost Rider takes his first step forward, and the world shudders. In the distance, a colossal cathedral rises from the sand. Its spires pierce the clouds, adorned with statues of saints locked in eternal agony. Banners of black and gold flutter in the toxic breeze. The sigil of a double-headed eagle glares down at him like the eye of a forgotten god. He feels it immediately, billions of souls, crushed beneath their own faith, all crying out for mercy that never comes. This is not hell. This is something worse. This is the Imperium of Man. A world where suffering has become sacred. A civilization that worships decay, that builds cathedrals from bones and sanctifies murder in the name of his will. The rider's flames flicker uncertainly. For the first time in centuries, he feels small. He moves through the dead city, his footsteps echoing across empty streets. The architecture is beyond comprehension. Gothic towers fused with machine veins, icons carved into steel, prayers etched in blood. Statues of angels hold weapons instead of harps. Everywhere he looks, he sees devotion, not to compassion, but to survival. These people have built a universe upon suffering and called it faith. He whispers, voice like cracking embers. Where am I? The answer comes not from the sky, but from within. The rider's flame flares violently, as if reacting to an unseen presence. The warp remembers him, an intruder, an impurity, a fire not born of chaos but of another hell entirely. And something else remembers too. Far beyond the city, beyond the void, ancient eyes open upon a golden throne. Another soul that burns, another weapon to test. The wind carries whispers, prayers, and screams intermingled. He senses movement in the shadows, mechanical figures draped in robes, carrying censers of smoke and holy oil. Tech priests, servants of the machine god. They see him and halt. One raises a staff of bronze and Vox screams in binary. Daemon. Bolters roar. Explosions tear the ground. Ghost Rider stands amidst the fire, his chains igniting once more. Bullets melt before touching his skin. The penance stare erupts, and the nearest priest collapses, his cybernetic eyes boiling from the inside. But the others don't retreat. They chant louder, invoking the Omnissiah, the Emperor, and purity of the machine spirit. Their faith is armor. Their fear is weaponized. Ghost Rider's flames begin to falter not from weakness, but confusion. Their prayers sting him. They burn like a different kind of fire, one that judges even the damned. He kneels, clutching his skull. The warp hums, the fire screams. Somewhere, between the infernal and the divine, he feels the universe watching. There is no heaven here, no hell, only the endless machinery of suffering where faith is forged into war, and hope is an ancient heresy. The rider understands he has not escaped his curse. He has only ridden deeper into damnation. He mounts his bike once more. The engine roars like a dying star. The flames ignite the air, and shadows flee from his light. A single thought echoes in his skull. If this world sins in his name, then I will judge him too. He rides toward the cathedral, the symbol of a dying god burning above. The chains rattle, the sky trembles, and somewhere, deep within the warp, something laughs, a god of blood, a god of change, a god of decay. Ghost Rider doesn't care. He's found his new hell to burn. The cathedral waited like a fossilized leviathan, ribs of stone and steel jutting against a poisoned sky. Pilgrim ashes spiraled on the wind. Vox bells tolled in a language made more of iron than of breath. He rode straight for its mouth, an arch big enough to swallow a titan, ornamented with saints who had bled themselves into martyrs and machine seraphs whose wings were soldered to prayer. The Hell Cycle's tires hissed over sanctified dust. Each rotation shed sparks that drifted upward, confused, as if gravity itself could not decide which god it served. Inside, incense crawled like fog across flagstones hammered by centuries of knees. There were no pews, only prostration mats and burn scars where zeal had met flesh. At the nave's heart, a dais, hexagrammatic, studded with censer pylons and purity seals, throbbed with a low undertone. Not a sound, exactly. A pressure, a call, the same bruise-colored summoning that had ripped him from one damned earth to this greater damnation. Ghost Rider cut the engine. Silence surged in to fill the space, thick as oil. He could feel them before he saw them. Adepts in red, robed like penitent engines, skin stapled to chrome. Tech priests stepped from shadowed transepts, spoke to each other in harmonics of metal teeth, and fanned out into a ritual perimeter. Servo skulls bobbed overhead, trailing parchment prayers stiff with wax. At the far end, a figure robed in sable watched with the stillness of a blade in a coffin. Inquisitor. The word arrived not as a thought, but as a diagnosis. The sable figure lifted a gauntlet etched in litanies. A chorus of vox voices barked the command to bind. The pylons around the dais flared. Sigils ignited geometries that once held demons like pinned butterflies. His chains, hot as a sermon, rattled against the invisible angles. The rider stepped forward anyway. The geometry fought him. It was a duel between shapes. "Daemon," the Inquisitor intoned, voice filtered through a rebreather that made faith sound like rust. "Identify." Ghost Rider's skull tilted, fire hissing from the edges like breath through cracked teeth. He did not reply. He did not pray. When he moved again, the wards squealed, and the stone beneath his boots spidered into fissures. The nearest tech priest stabbed a staff into a sigil and screamed Binharic invocations to the machine god. The hexagram brightened to sickly brilliance. The dais opened. Not a hatch, not a trapdoor, reality itself folded like a litany too long repeated. The chapel moaned, candles guttered and then burned sideways. Every fresco of saint and martyr wept blood that steamed into scripture. The air filled with iron filings and choir static. Something vast turned its attention toward the flaring geometry, like a sky whale angling to swallow a lantern. The warp pressed a finger through the seam of the world. Ghost Rider felt the pressure first as a bruising on the soul, then as a wind with too many directions. His fire answered, reflexively, defiantly, the hell within him rising like a judge standing from his bench. Blue-orange flame raged into a crown. The wards buckled, rebounded, screamed. For a heartbeat, the pentangle became a cage of light around a star. Then the star fell. The floor vanished. He didn't drop so much as slip, as if the world had been concealing a layer of oil under its skin, and he had found it. The cathedral, the Inquisitor, the incense, they collapsed to threads pulled by invisible needles, and were gone. Only the roar of the engine remained, because even when he did not command it, the hell cycle hunted him, dragging tire fire across whatever counted as a road between realities. There are storms, and then there is the storm behind storms. He had ridden highways into night, and deserts into heat death. He had hunted through alleys where sin grew like moss. He had ridden through hell itself, where the geometry of punishment loops on itself in elegant cruelty. None of that was the warp. The warp is mood made weather, the tantrum of a species, the seam rip along the mind. The warp was color that had learned to hate. It welcomed him like a cathedral welcomes screams. He could not tell what direction was, because direction is a promise, and the warp keeps none. Thoughts scratched their way across his skull like small, desperate animals, and it took a moment to understand they were not his. The prayers of dying soldiers, the last words of a mother taped to a bulkhead, choking on smoke, the delighted shriek of something shaped like a child and a knife at once, the laughter of a god too bored to speak. Each voice tried to steer his hands. The rider clenched flaming fingers to fists, and the chain wound itself around one forearm, a serpent making a vow. "Not yours," he said, and the words burned. From below, if there was a below, rose architecture. Not stone, yet somehow heavier. Citations of cathedra built from memory. Apse and transept and arch, but warped. Ribs of Gothic math torsioned around a wound. Choir lofts dripping stalactites of frozen song. The psycher echo of 1,000 masses said by 1,000 trembling mouths built a cathedral of habit floating, listing, bleeding incense that smelled like the last comfort before a firing squad. Within that crooked cathedral, forms moved, parishioners with too many elbows, celebrants whose vestments were themselves, a nave thing that rang like a bell when it fed. The hell cycle roared across nothing, leaving a smear of reality behind its tires. The smear hardened into a road for a heartbeat, and then flaked away like charred confession. Daemons noticed him. They came on in shapes that quoted mortals but did not flatter them. Some wore faces backwards as if that were an improvement. Some crawled with the shameless satisfaction of wounds. Some winged. Some sang. All delighted in being seen, as if attention were a sacrament. Ghost Rider swung the chain, and its links sang his verdict. The first daemon split open into birds. The second became a stained glass window that wept spiders into itself. A third, taller, patient, horned with meanings that had already won, smiled. It spoke a name that was not his, and yet every syllable fit. "For a rider," the horned thing said gently, "you do not travel, you flee." He answered with the pennant stare. Hellfire met warp light. Reflections of reflections multiplied, strobing through meanings until meaning went blind. The daemon's smile cracked pleasantly, and the crack ran down the spine of the floating cathedral behind it. Choir song staggered, a second crack, then a third, then the glass of habit shattered, and all the prayers stored in its panes blew free in a blizzard of useless sanctity. The daemon bowed as it dissolved. "Good," it sighed, sincerely, and was gone. He didn't chase. There is no chase in a place with no distances. He braced and rode the convulsions of unreality until the storm changed its mind again. The warp is not a sea, but it does toss like one when bored. The hell cycle canted, fell, rose, repeated, until falling and rising were the same motion. In that swing he saw other wrecks, ships whose hulls were prayers, crewed by blind navigators, coffin barges stuffed with psychers, humming like plucked nerves. A black ship whose prow was the face of a woman being very brave. Everywhere, the same mistake, thinking you could bargain with a mood. He felt something like pity and then rejected it. Pity is a luxury for the uncondemned. A cold radiance spread across the redness, and the warp flinched around it. Not banished, rearranged. The light was order trying to happen. It arrived as a compass rose that refused to spin, a choir that would accept no disharmony, an eye seen from within. It pulled at him with a gravity different from the storm, promising not safety but a single direction. Astronomicon, some embedded scavenged lore suggested, a lighthouse powered by a dying god's endless scream. He did not aim for it. He leaned away. Instinct. Vengeance resents instruction, even from lighthouses. The warp noticed his refusal and loved him for it. The storm redoubled. The voices changed. No longer pleas and confessions, but bargains. Serve and be spared. Turn your fire outward, against their saints, and be made a prince. Tell us how hell made you, and we will improve the recipe. Each voice wore a mask. Brass, bone, silk, rot. Each voice announced a god without admitting it. Ghost Rider answered by opening the throttle. He found a rhythm, not motion decision. He refused the bargains one heartbeat at a time. He let the chain decide where to bite. He let his fire do what it had always done, make liars keep their promises. The warp, thwarted, tried a different trap, memory. It peeled the meat from his past and wore it. A father's voice begging, a lover's laugh dying, a boy's prayer that never reached anyone. "Good," he said, and burned those memories clean, not to forget them, but to deny the trap the sugar on its hook. Ahead, if a head still had any jurisdiction, something loomed, not architecture and not beast, a reef. Reality had not made it, but it had broken on it many times, debris of ships, faith, lives. The storm curved around the reef with the sulk of a child refused. In the lee, a stillness, not calm, held. He steered toward it. Within the stillness stood a man of gold who was not there, a statue made of wish, a corpse made of crown. He did not see a face, only judgment poured into shape. He felt not heard, an invitation that was not a request. "Burn for me." The rider's flame thrashed in him like a beast on a hook. Not in worship, never in worship, but in recognition. One judge recognizes another. He felt the truth of this place like teeth. In a galaxy whose language is violence and sacrament, there is no difference between a god and a verdict served hot enough. He put a boot down onto the reef. The warp shrieked. The stillness became a landing. The hell cycle clicked as it cooled, a soldier cleaning his weapon between volleys. The storm banged against the reef with idiot persistence and accomplished nothing. He looked up at the man of gold who was not there and said, with the politeness owed a fellow executioner, "I do not burn on command." Something changed in the distance, an intake of breath the size of a species. The reef bucked, the storm inverted, the stillness cracked along old fractures. The rider felt the pull again, not to the lighthouse this time, but to the world behind it, to iron, to smoke, to a billion sins waiting like dry tinder. He let it take him. The warp spat him out like gristle. He fell through a sky full of ash flake and him. He saw, Far below, a hive city venting prayers like smog and an army suffering in proper squares. He aimed for the cathedral, where the rift had first widened its mouth to taste him. The hexagram was still open. The Inquisitor was still waiting, pistol raised like a sacrament. Ghost Rider hit the stone in a wash of blue flame. The warp shrank away, insulted. The geometry collapsed, lifeless as a dead moth. Scripture burned. Servo skulls fell like hail. He stood, fire hissing, chains smoking. "Identify," the Inquisitor repeated. The rider's skull tilted. Fire dripped off his teeth. "Judge," he said. And outside, somewhere the sky could hear, something with many names began to move toward the city. The first thing he heard was breathing. Not human, not mechanical. Something between a chorus of lungs wrapped in engines, synchronized by faith and fear. The air itself throbbed with the pulse of a billion sinners, each one whispering to a god who had stopped listening 10,000 years ago. Ghost Rider stood on the precipice of a hive city. It rose from the planet's crust like a tumor made of metal, its towers scraping the low clouds, its veins pumping smoke into a sky already choking on belief. Lightning crawled through smog, illuminating cathedrals fused with foundries, manufactoria that shaped both bullets and prayers with equal devotion. He had seen cities built on sin before, but never one where sin was sacred. He began to walk. The ground was slick with blood and oil. Pilgrims crawled past, dragging icons carved from their own bones. Cherubs of brass and flesh fluttered above, their childlike faces masking the void of augmetics. A preacher screamed through a vox horn, his tongue replaced by a glowing rune. To suffer is to serve. To bleed is to belong. The crowd below answered in unison, voices trembling with devotion and terror. Ghost Rider's fire dimmed to a simmering ember, his steps echoing through the mire. Every soul he passed shimmered like a candle in the wind, fragile, flickering, rotting. He could see their sins like fingerprints of shadow. Murder, deceit, blasphemy, cowardice, all were carved into their souls. But in this world, these marks were badges of loyalty. No one here sought forgiveness, only permission to sin for the Emperor. A young acolyte stumbled before him, clutching a scroll of penitence longer than her body. Her eyes were gone, replaced by seals of purity, inked in her own blood. When she sensed his heat, she fell to her knees, trembling, voice cracking. "O Emperor of mankind, spare your servant." Ghost Rider paused. He saw the truth inside her, a soul shattered long before she was born. The fire within her was not her own. It belonged to the machine of devotion that consumed her. She was innocent, and yet, her faith had condemned her more thoroughly than any sin ever could. He knelt beside her, the heat of his presence warping the parchment she clutched. The child whispered the same prayer again, over and over, not to him, but to the phantom of a god who would never answer. For the briefest moment, Ghost Rider felt something colder than fire. Pity. Then the ember flared in his chest again, reminding him that mercy had long been burned out of his soul. He rose and left her praying to ashes. The deeper he went, the louder the hive became. Machinery and misery merged into a single industrial hymn. Conveyor belts of flesh and metal intertwined, humans becoming parts, parts becoming faith. In the upper spires, nobles in golden masks drowned themselves in excess. Below, in the sump levels, mutants and heretics whispered forbidden names in the dark. Every layer was a different kind of damnation. Every level screamed a different prayer. And through it all, he felt watched. Not by chaos, not by hell. By order, the cold, unflinching gaze of a theocracy that believed every soul was property. Then he saw them. A patrol of Arbites, the law made flesh, encased in carapace armor that gleamed with the reflection of his fire. They moved like machines carved from scripture, shock moles humming with electric judgment. When they saw him, this skeletal being of flame, they raised their weapons instantly. "Halt! In the name of the Emperor." The first shell hit him square in the chest. It did nothing but scatter sparks. The second volley came from all directions. Bolter fire chewed through the air, detonating in clouds of heat and dust. The crowd screamed, not in horror, but in worship. To see divine punishment was a blessing. Ghost Rider stepped through the smoke. Chains ignited, eyes flared like dying suns. He lashed out once. The chain sliced through the void, wrapping around one Arbite's neck. The man's soul burned instantly, memories flashing like fireworks, the lives he'd taken, the innocents he'd tortured, the orders he'd obeyed without question. The penance stare ignited. When Ghost Rider released him, there was no body. Only a hollow armor shell, kneeling, head bowed, smoke rising from the inside. The others hesitated. One muttered a prayer through gritted teeth. Another fell to his knees and kissed the ground, chanting louder to drown his fear. Their faith was their shield, but their belief was hollow armor made of paper. He did not kill the rest. He didn't need to. They were already dead inside. He walked until the city opened into a courtyard of iron and glass. There, a statue towered above all, a colossus of the Emperor himself, his face hidden by the golden radiance of 1,000 candles. Beneath it, priests whipped themselves bloody, chanting for redemption they'd never earn. Ghost Rider looked up. The flame inside his skull guttered and flared, reacting to something unseen, something vast, ancient, watching. He realized the truth then. This world didn't belong to chaos. It didn't even belong to man. It belonged to the idea of the Emperor, a god that demanded obedience in exchange for survival. And that idea burned brighter, harsher, and colder than hell. "You have built your heaven," he murmured, voice cracking like coals. "And it looks exactly like your hell." The nearest priest froze, eyes widening at the heresy. He raised a relic staff, shouting for guards, for purity seals, for flame. Ghost Rider smiled a grin of bone and damnation. "You want fire?" he whispered. "I'll give you fire." The courtyard exploded in blue flame. The statue of the Emperor cracked, molten light bleeding from its seams. Candles became rivers of fire. Priests screamed as their faith burned with them, not as punishment, but as revelation. Their prayers reached the warp and found only laughter in reply. When the fire died, only one figure remained standing among the ruin. The rider. Around him, 1,000 souls rose like fireflies, free at last, yet lost. He watched them drift upward, toward the sky that no longer knew light. For a moment, the city seemed silent. Then the alarms began to wail. From the spires above, engines thundered. Dropships descended like falling angels. And from the vox speakers that lined every street came a single, unified decree. By order of the Holy Inquisition, the entity known as the Burning Heretic is declared exterminatus-level threat. The people screamed. The priests wept. The skies opened. Ghost Rider mounted the hell cycle once more. The engine rumbled like a dying god's heart. He looked to the heavens where ships glimmered like teeth in the dark. If this galaxy had declared war on him, then he would oblige. "Let's see," he growled, fire swelling with divine hatred. "If your Emperor's light can survive my hellfire." He revved the engine. The city trembled. The night split open. And the rider surged upward through flame and smoke, heading toward a war that even hell had never imagined. They named him in 1,000 vox bursts. The Burning Heretic, the Chain Sinner, the Daemon on Wheels. Edicts raced along fiber veins and hymn wires, translated into every dialect that pain can speak. And at their center, where orders harden into verdicts, an inquisitor closed his eyes and listened to the fear. He wore sable and scripture like a second skeleton. A rosette hung at his throat, small as a coin, heavy as a planet's worth of permission. Around him, a war room filled with incense and static. Auspex screens bled sigils. Servo skulls clacked their teeth like rosary beads. The city's arteries were mapped in red, spires and sump, manufactoria and cathedra, elevators like iron esophagi swallowing the devout. The Inquisitor lifted a gauntlet, and the chamber fell into the kind of silence that precedes both liturgy and execution. "Lock the egress tunnels," he said, voice sanded by rebreathers and the habit of command. "Seal the pilgrim ramps. Deploy shock cohorts Gamma to Delta 9. Activate null assets." A robed adept bowed, mecha tendrils shaking. "Sanctioned blanks are few, Lord. Their proximity causes distress." "Good," the Inquisitor replied. "Distress is proof that we are approaching the truth." He set a brass stylus to parchment, writing a prayer that was also a hunting license. When he finished the final flourish, the parchment smoked ink reacting to sigils cut into the desk by generations of predecessors. Permissions became permissions. Somewhere far below, alarms reworded themselves into purpose. Ghost Rider cut through the night like a blade remembers its whetstone. The hell cycle bucked and laughed under him, spitting blue fire that curled into the seams of architecture. He did not plan a route. He followed heat. The heat of fear, of lies, of souls trying not to be seen by the thing that sees everything. He felt the city tighten not like a trap closing, but like a fist closing around prayer. Streets rerouted, doors that weren't doors yesterday became cruciform vaults today, stairwells folded into spirals of sanctified geometry. The Imperium is a machine that can convert any space into a confession booth. He rode into a manufactorum where cogitators ticked like insects inside a god's skull. Workers in flayed red uniforms moved in choreographies of ache. Cherub drones snipped purity seals onto crates. The foreman saw the skull of fire and dropped to his knees so quickly that his kneecaps cracked. "Mercy," the foreman cried. "By the Emperors." The chain snapped out, gentle as a blessing, and touched the man's brow. Penance unscrolled, bribes pocketed, accidents staged, safety protocols blotted out with holy oil because quotas had become a sacrament stronger than life. Ghost Rider let the man see each choice sit beside the consequence it had married. When the chain withdrew, the foreman crawled to a shrine and began to tear his own seals off with trembling hands. "Repentance," the rider rasped, "is not an alibi." He turned the bike toward a gantry and froze. The heat went away. Not cooled, cancelled. The fire in his chest recoiled like a beast smelling winter. The world's edge folded, and 5 figures stepped through, cowled, featureless, their very presence a subtraction. Sisters without song, men without footprints on the soul, nulls, blanks, places where the warp forgets its name. Behind them came faith with teeth, arbites in formation, shockmoles humming psalms, stormtroopers wearing prayers like armor, skull drones bearing censer-swinging servitors, and at the center, the Inquisitor, a small iron storm all his own. "Identify," he said again, as he had in the cathedral, but this time it was not a question, it was a scalpel. The nearest blank advanced. Ghost Rider's flames guttered, blue wavering to the color of memory. The hell within him hissed, offended not by threat but by absence. He struck first chain lashing with verdict only to watch the links dim where they crossed the blank's shadow. The chain fell heavy, like ordinary iron suddenly remembering humility. The blank raised a palm stamped with a sign that faith had sharpened, heat died around it, sound thinned. Ghost Rider stepped backward, not in fear but to measure the mathematics of this new geometry. His voice, when it came, sounded distant, pulled through gauze. "You silence sins," he said, "or you silence the witness to them." The Inquisitor's visor glimmered. "We silence what offends the throne." "And who decided the throne cannot be offended?" "The throne," he said simply, and lifted 2 fingers. The Arbites fired. Bolter shells ran like wolves. The rider dove low, engines screaming up into the note that tears stone. Sparks real, not infernal, skipped from steel. He took the ramp, burst through a lattice of stained glass where saints were shown receiving their amputations with gratitude, and fell into open air. A skimmer gunship rose to meet him, wide-bellied and sure, its hull banded in hazard blessings. Turrets coughed. Heavy rounds plowed the air. He threaded them, drawing with the bike a sigil no priest would ever approve. The chain snapped out, found a wing pylon, and yanked. The gunship slewed into a buttress, shedding monks and rivets. He landed on a balcony 3 levels down, shattered gargoyles blinking molten tears as he skidded past. The balcony gave onto a cloister garden, a rectangle of dead soil offering a choice between 4 identical colonnades. It was a puzzle designed for pilgrims. He did not slow. He rode directly across the soil and into the opposite wall, which remembered that defiance is also a key. It opened. Tunnels. Not the kind that mice dig, but the kind that guilt does. Old, older, oldest. Brick mortared with a slurry of myths. Pipes that carried both water and rumor. Icons left by hands that are dust now, their prayers cached in metal that hummingbirds sang when the hell cycle passed. He killed the engine and listened. Above boots, hymns, doors, below mechanisms, appetites, a head scent, not air scent, soul scent. The city's layout was wrong on purpose, designed to herd prey, not to exits, but to audiences. He walked the bike by hand, flame coiled tight, a candle that remembered being a star. The tunnel swelled into a vault, then a nave, then a room that had once been a prayer and was now a courtroom. He knew it by the furniture, a dais higher than good sense, a chair with too many armrests, a collection of instruments built to measure contrition in numbers that no one would ever check. On the wall, a fresco, an angel with a book and a sword, one hand holding scales that were, by coincidence, never level. He stood under the fresco and waited because it is polite to let hunters arrive at their own ambush. They came in like a sentence being diagrammed. Nulls first, drafting reality into simple shapes, troopers second, filling those shapes with kinetics, the Inquisitor last, punctuation that could be period, colon, or execution. "Here," the Inquisitor said, "will do." He spoke into the vox, and the room answered by remembering old functions. Shackles sprouted from the dais like iron vines. Candles flared in patterns that suggested both benediction and trap. From vents, a thin perfume, burner's oil, and something like quiet. The blanks spread, edging the space into a desert where his fire had to crawl. The Inquisitor mounted the dais and rested one hand on the chair that turned authority into a height advantage. "Confess," he said. Ghost Rider's skull cocked as if hearing a joke approach. "To whom?" "To the only court that matters." He looked at the fresco. "I have sat in many courts," he said, "and learned that the judge is always on trial." Something hard and pleased moved in the shadow behind the visor. "Then we understand each other." The Inquisitor drew a relic pistol, beautiful, baroque, lethal in the way that time makes. It contained a fragment of a saint's tooth and a machine spirit that had never lost a case. He aimed it at the place where a heart would be, if the rider were still a supplicant to flesh. "Last chance," he said, not unkindly. The blanks tightened the noose of absence. Ghost Rider closed his eyes. When he opened them, the room saw itself reflected. The penance stare is not a beam. It is a mirror that refuses to flatter. It does not ask what you did. It asks why you liked doing it, and then refuses to let that answer pretend it was a reason. The nearest trooper folded, not from heat, but from a life edited back into uncut footage. Another screamed without sound. The blanks were good at catching sound and making it kneel. The Inquisitor flinched as a shard of himself struck the armor of his training and slid off, score marking the doctrine under it. He fired. The round punched into the rider and bloomed a flower of sanctified shrapnel. The flame guttered and then inhaled the wound, made it fuel, and stood taller. "Judge," the rider said again, but not as a name, as a sentence. He broke the proximity of the blanks by choosing not to be near them. Hellfire rushed in. Chains like molten scripture wrote new lines in the room's old poem. Shackles melted. The fresco wept and blinked. The Inquisitor stepped down from the dais. He did not retreat. He discarded the pistol and drew a blade whose edge wore a halo of machine light. He swung. The blade met chain, met verdict. Sparks rang like bells. "Why this city?" he demanded between strikes that were prayers. "Why my people?" "Because you taught them to love the whip," Ghost Rider answered, knocking the blade aside. "And to call it proof." A null lunged, and the world went thin. The rider seized the blank's wrist and, very gently, placed a single ember on the palm. It didn't burn. It remained, a speck of impossible in the sentence of never. The blank stared at it with the first emotion they had felt in years: confusion. "Keep that," the rider said. "It will teach you that absence is also a choice." The Inquisitor paused, blade lowered a fraction. In that hesitation, the war in his chest became audible. Duty reciting chapter and verse against something older than duty that had learned to speak after verse runs out. He stepped back, visor angling as if to study a painting no catalogue had prepared him for. "This ends," he said, "not with your sermon, but with containment. I will learn what you are and how you wound the warp without belonging to it." "Then hunt," Ghost Rider said, turning toward the mouth of the chamber, "and learn what your hunt says about you." sirens above reconfigured into a new grammar. City-wide. Macro. A sound reserved for plagues and gods. Dust fell from ribs of stone. The Inquisitor looked toward the ceiling not with fear, but with professional irritation. "What now?" he asked the room. And the room, obliged by long service, answered through a vox grill. Primary threat escalating. Secondary signatures. Multiple. Designation. Cult activity surge. Tertiary. Demonic incursion approaching perimeter. The Inquisitor smiled the way men do when the universe finally provides a fair fight. He pointed his blade at the rider. "Our hunt will resume." Ghost Rider swung into the saddle. The engine took the cue like a faithful hound spotting wolves. "It never stopped," he said. He punched through the courtroom doors into a stairwell where laws had learned to echo. The Inquisitor followed with his cohort, nulls pulling silence behind them like cloaks. Above, the city's sign sky turned the color of open wounds. Below, chance ripened into something that believed itself a promise. Between those poles, a skull on fire, and a man who makes monsters sign paperwork prepared to teach each other what judgment means when the whole galaxy is the docket. The city burned, but the fire was not his. It was the fire of faith, fanned by fear priests burning incense, soldiers burning heretics, civilians burning hope. The hive itself screamed in hymns as it died. From above, the Inquisitor's fleet darkened the clouds, casting shadows shaped like judgment. From below, chaos began to whisper through the cracks his arrival had torn open. The Imperium and the Warp Two gods in the same cathedral had found a new altar, and it was him. Ghost Rider rode through the storm of debris and devotion, his chains dragging sparks through oceans of ash. Everywhere, he saw the consequences of faith without mercy. Arbites burned their own stations to keep the taint from spreading. Tech priests purged their databanks with fire, chanting litanies to erase their own curiosity. Children were lined up in the streets, reciting creeds that sounded more like confessions. Each voice, each scream, added another note to the symphony of guilt that surrounded him. And the warp listened. It wasn't wind that moved through the alleys. It was hunger. The warp smelled his fire and mistook it for kinship. Invisible claws dragged through reality, tracing the edges of his flames like curious fingers against skin. And then, something answered. He stopped at the ruins of a cathedral where the walls had melted into glass. Inside, beneath the collapsed dome, a priest still lived, half buried in molten stone. His eyes were gone. His mouth was a tunnel of blood, whispering a prayer that had forgotten its god. "Save us." Ghost Rider knelt beside him. The priest's skin blistered just from his presence. "Your God," the rider said softly, "has already spoken. You just refuse to hear the answer." He reached out, flame licking against the man's chest. His hand sank through flesh and into something deeper. He wasn't touching the body, he was touching the soul. And the warp saw the door open. 1,000 colors screamed. 1,000,000 whispers fused into one. "Look what you've done. Look what you could become. Fire that judges can also consume." The rider's skull snapped back. For the first time, his flame trembled. The priest's soul split open before him, fragmented, refracted, multiplying into versions of itself. Some prayed, some laughed, some begged for forgiveness from gods that would never answer. The warp fed the illusion, stretching the vision until even his penance stare began to fracture. He was inside a soul, but the warp was inside him. Visions crashed like waves. He saw the Horus Heresy, a galaxy set aflame by pride disguised as loyalty. He saw the black ships, carrying psychers to their silent harvest. He saw worlds purged, not for sin, but for inconvenience. And through it all, the Emperor's light golden, merciless, unwavering. A voice whispered from within the fire, not his, not Mephisto's, but something older, an echo born before even hell had a name. "You think you are judgment. You are only the symptom of what they've already done to themselves." His fire turned black for a moment, the color of burnt truth. The warp's laughter turned shrill, like glass fracturing under pressure. It offered him power, understanding, kinship in damnation. "Join us," it hissed. We too punish the faithful. We too burn hypocrisy. He looked into the storm. He saw faces forming out of madness, Slaneshi courtiers with lips made of silk and screams, Kornate berserkers chanting psalms of slaughter, Nurglite preachers weeping pus for blessings, and above all Tsiench, the one who smiled, because everything that burned also revealed. Ghost Rider's skull tilted, the chains curling like serpents. "You burn for chaos," he said. "I burn for truth." The warp recoiled. Reality snapped. He was back in the cathedral, surrounded by ash and broken glass. The priest's body was gone, reduced to memory. The floor beneath him had transformed into a mirror of molten gold, reflecting both his flame and his face as it once was a man named Johnny Blaze. He could almost hear his old heartbeat again, slow and human. A hallucination, or perhaps a temptation. He knelt beside the reflection. "Is this your mercy, Warp, to remind me of the life you took?" The reflection smiled, and it spoke. "You took it, Johnny." The voice was his own, warped, distorted, honest. "You chose vengeance. You wanted this fire. You thought it would make you righteous. But look at you now, another monster, in a world that breeds nothing else." Ghost Rider's flame flickered, uncertain for the first time in centuries. "If vengeance is sin," he said quietly, "then your galaxy will never be saved." The reflection's hand pressed against the molten mirror. "Then join us. We'll give you purpose. We'll let you burn for eternity with meaning." He stared into his own empty sockets. Then he closed his hand. The mirror shattered. "Meaning," he whispered, "is the lie we tell the fire so it doesn't stop burning." The warp screamed again, angry now its seduction refused. It clawed at him, trying to reclaim the soul it had almost swallowed. He stood, chains unraveling, each link glowing brighter than sunlight. The fire roared back to life, blue and pure, purging the corruption that had dared to nest in his flame. The penance stare flared outward, not a beam this time, but a wave. Every daemon within miles felt it. They saw themselves. Every pleasure became guilt. Every act of rage became grief. Every lie became a mirror showing its author's face. The warp convulsed. Even daemons, born of sin, could not bear to witness what they were. And the Imperium below felt it too. Inquisitors halted mid-sermon. Psychers screamed as their visions inverted. For one instant, just one, the entire hive felt seen. Then the light went out. When the dust settled, the rider stood alone in the ruins. The warp had retreated, licking its wounds, furious at the lesson. But something else had changed. His fire no longer whispered hell's voice. It hummed with something older, quieter, balanced. He understood it now. Hellfire and warpfire were reflections of the same truth. Judgment without understanding, destruction without compassion. And between them stood him the only thing that burned not for chaos or control, but for clarity. He mounted the hell cycle. The engine rumbled like thunder at a funeral. Above, the sky opened just enough to reveal the faint shimmer of a fleet in orbit. The Inquisition would be coming. So would chaos. And between their blades of light and dark, there was now only the rider, the thing they both mistook for a demon, but who was really a mirror. He revved the engine once, the echo rolling through the dead cathedral. "I've looked into your hell," he whispered to the sky. "Now look into mine." Flame exploded, the ground cracked, and Ghost Rider tore through the air, leaving behind a trail of blue fire that refused to fade. He felt it first as a pressure in the teeth, a grinding, iron taste, as if every molar had learned to clench. Then came the drum. Not sound, instruction, a pulse that made arteries choose violence. The city, already a kiln of doctrine, now found a second furnace, rage. Ghost Rider cut through a Manufactorum Avenue where statues of heroes held chains instead of laurels. The Hell Cycle's fire skittered across Ferrocrete as though it were tallow. Above, the sky had soured to coagulant red, a scab forming over the wound he had opened in the warp. Vox bells failed, one by one, strangled mid-peal. The world wanted to say mercy. The drum corrected it to murder. He stopped at a causeway of skulls that had once been saints' heads and now were honest. The air grew heavy with iron filings and all the prayers that end in fists, Something vast stepped closer, not with feet, but with permission. Blood for... The thought did not complete. It didn't need to. Completion is softness. A shape coagulated out of heat haze, not a single figure, an officer core of appetites. Chain axes and banners, jawbones wired into creeds, horns grown the way cities grow around old battles and the promise of new ones. Some wore spines as mantles, some wore quiet like a challenge. At their center stood a champion whose armor drank the light and belched it back as scorn. "Rider," the champion said, voice like a saw learning manners, "you burn well." Ghost Rider watched his own fire shiver at the word well. Praise is a kind of leash. "You mistake me for a torch," he replied. "I am a verdict." "Verdicts," the champion said mildly, "require wars. We are a certainty factory. Ride under our banners and your judgments will be endless. No lulls, no nights where the engine cools, no questions. Only the work." Behind the champion, the war host parted. A path, an invitation carved in corpses. Beyond it, storm fronts of berserkers thundered toward other districts, red tides choosing shorelines shaped like cathedrals. The drum climbed a note. The city shuddered. Khorne does not argue. Khorne arranges. He arranges the world until answers are reduced to ranges. Ghost Rider leaned the hell cycle by a fraction, an animal reading a wind. "The work," he said, "is never the excuse." "Excuses are for those who need sleep," the champion said, and lifted an axe whose teeth were alphabetic. "We offer wakefulness, the prayer that never stops." He could feel the bargain without having to hear it. A road without intersections, a vocation without doubt. Flame braided into fury until judgment became merely efficient slaughter. Hell had offered cures for guilt. The warp had offered meaning. This god offered permission. "I have burned tyrants who called their orders purity," he said. "I won't trade one liturgy for another." A ripple of amusement moved through the host. The champion's helm angled, as if studying a rare animal. "You fear becoming a soldier," the champion said. "You misunderstand. You would be a standard. They would fight to be near you, to warm themselves at your certainty. And those who could not reach you would still kill in your name." The chain at the rider's wrist tightened, a snake teaching itself restraint. "Names," he said, "are how the dead are organized." The champion nodded once, as if acknowledging a colleague. "Then let us organize them faster." The first wave came on not to test him. Real gods don't test, they begin. Berserkers sprinted with the idiot grace of falling hammers, chain axes hysterical with approval. The hell cycle reared, a beast finding purchase on air, and slammed down into speed. The chain tore arcs through meat and oath. Heads did what they do. Blood obeyed gravity. Each death tried to make him feel bigger. The drum wrote compliments inside his bones. He answered with the penance stare. It is hard to shame rage. Rage has its own scriptures. The first berserker to meet those eyes saw, not his victims. But the moment he learned to call surrender weakness, he folded with a sound like an altar snapping. Another met the stare and drowned on the memory of laughing while a planet burned to give his god a sunset. A third kept running headless and only fell because the ground insisted. The champion did not move. Commanders of real wars seldom do. Movement confesses need. He watched, absorbing data into a doctrine that had stored a million versions of the same lesson. "Your gaze," he said conversationally, "is a sermon to those who still believe in the courtroom. My god prefers labs." Ghost Rider pulled a berserker off the bike with a hook of chain and threw the body in an elegant parabola into a shrine where a saint without hands had been learning to bless without hypocrisy. The shrine collapsed, releasing a smell like old tears. "You want me to murder until there are no more questions," the rider said. "But I am a question." The champion smiled. His teeth were not sharp. Sharpness is vanity. His teeth were useful. "And I am the answer that keeps arriving," he said, and finally moved. The axe no different from any other except that it had been told a purpose so many times that it believed came down. The chain intercepted it. Sparks rang, then chose sides. They chose the axe. The shock pushed the rider back onto skidding wheels. He carved a curve in the ferrocrete, the line where refusal had stood. A second swing. Horizontal, doctrine turned into diagram. He ducked. The axe passed overhead and took a choir loft off a manufactorum's flank. Hymnals fluttered like slaughtered birds. The hell cycle throttled itself, engine note hardening to the frequency where stone lets go. He zigzagged through the melee. He did not aim for men. Men are symptoms. He aimed for banners. He wrapped the chain around a standard pole carved from an enemy's femur and yanked, dragging colors through mud, cutting a throat the flag had learned to simulate. A nearby squad faltered, the drum stuttered a microsecond. The champion laughed softly. "You even murder symbols. We have a vacancy." "Resignations only," the rider said, and accelerated. They collided again, axe against chain, faith against verdict. Neither yielded, so the city did. Buttresses lost interest in holding, bridges held a meeting and voted to become weapons. Statues blessed no one, and then learned to fall with grace. The fight translated architecture into memory. The champions spoke between strikes. A lecturer filling silences with the comfort of curriculum. "You burn out hesitation. Good. But hesitation is the only honest thing the weak ever own. Kill it for them, and they can finally perform their duties cleanly." "Clean," the rider said, and head-butted him with a skull on fire, "is a word for knives." The blow staggered the champion, not for pain. Pain was an old friend, but for novelty. He stepped back, visor cracked, and what leaked through that crack was not blood. It was approval. Behind him, the war host shifted, as if settling into pews to watch something worth the tithe. Overhead, the sky pushed its red deeper into the black, until the horizon looked like a cauterized wound. The drum dropped to half-time, a courtesy to attention. "Rider," the champion said, and for the first time used the word with respect instead of recruitment. "You are almost ours already. You hate hypocrisy, which is just cowardly rage. You burn mercy, which is just rage that got baptized. Come, call it justice if you must. You will not be the first." Ghost Rider's flames thinned to a tight corona. In that tightening was decision, not doubt. "I will not be the last either," he said. He swung the chain low under the plate, against the part of every warrior that still belongs to gravity. The champion took the pain as a request and supplied the answer. He drove the axe haft first into the rider's ribs, an etiquette of shattering. The hellfire convulsed, then chose anger, then remembered it was not allowed to choose that. It steadied. A shadow crossed them, something winged and delighted by attention. The drum hiccuped. The war host glanced upward, irritated, not threatened. Daemons that do not belong to Khorne are like advertisements during a tournament. The champion relaxed a fraction, the way men of war do when the audience becomes crowded. Ghost Rider felt the change and understood. Even rage has propriety. He found it funny, then he found it useful. He killed the drum, not the sound, the metronome in the soul. He did it by opening the penance stare not at a face but at the sky, at the red, at the concept that told men killing is what their hands had been waiting for. He forced the world to look at itself mid-swing. The war host faltered. One berserker froze with an axe above his lover's back. Love is not a contradiction for men like this. It is a schedule, and the pause held long enough to turn rage into reading comprehension. He saw his own history unredacted. He saw that he had called many things orders when he meant permission. He dropped the axe. The drum lost a beat. The champion surged at the vacancy, trying to cover the gap with professionalism. He overcommitted because that is how professionals lose to questions. Ghost Rider slipped inside the arc and wrapped the chain around the axe's throat. He pulled. The weapon remembered humility. The champion's gauntlet opened, not from weakness, but from interest. He wanted to see what came next. "What comes next," the rider said, and flung the axe into the causeway of skulls, "is the part where you tell your god he cannot have my name." The champion looked at his empty hand, then at the skull road where the axe lay like a title on hiatus. He bowed. It was not submission, it was etiquette at a gate neither would yet pass. "Another time," he said, and the war host began to withdraw, not routed, not even deterred, simply rescheduled. The red in the sky relaxed to a manageable threat. The drum detached from the bones of men and resumed its proper place, weather. As they faded, the champion turned back once, visor showing him in silhouette. "Rider," he said with a small admiration that did not stain, You will find that all gods are recruiters, even the quiet ones. Ghost Rider watched the last banners sink into alleys that didn't exist yesterday. He stood very still, until the air remembered it had lungs again. He threw a leg over the hell cycle. The engine answered, happy not to be drafted, happier to be chosen. Above, the fleet's knives of light adjusted their aim. Below, a rumble like confession heralded something stubborn and bureaucratic and inevitable. The Inquisitor, returning with a new idea that had teeth. He turned the throttle and spoke to the road, which is the only honest congregation. "I'll burn every contract," he said. "Then I'll read the fine print." The city listened, which is to say, it planned more traps. He rode toward them, flame narrowed to purpose, not rage, leaving behind a field where blood had almost learned a new prayer and was angry about it. They took him with chains that sang hymns, not the kind of iron forged in sweat and sin, but doctrinal iron, sanctified through 1,000 blessings. Each link was etched with prayers to the Emperor, every joint soldered with sacred oils that hissed against his fire. The hell cycle fought until its engine screamed itself into silence, burning out in a final roar of defiance before being drowned in a lake of holy water. He was dragged through corridors that had forgotten light. Monks in red hoods walked beside him, chanting binary psalms that sounded more like machine code than worship. He did not resist. For once, the spirit of vengeance was curious. They brought him into a chamber vast as guilt itself, a sanctum buried beneath the hive, built where even the warp hesitated to echo. The air reeked of incense, ozone, and old fear. At the room's center stood the Inquisitor. He had removed his helm. His face was carved from duty, no joy, no hatred, just an iron acceptance that this too was service. Behind him, null wards pulsed faintly, a perimeter of reality itself refusing to bend. Candles lined the walls like sentinels, their flames perfectly still, as if time itself was watching. Ghost Rider was bound to a throne of black iron, inscribed with hexagrammatic wards. Each rune flared red as his fire touched it, then dimmed again, hungrily drinking the light. He could feel the wards digging into him, not as pain, but as definition. They were rewriting what he was correcting his existence, labeling him not as Ghost Rider, but as Specimen Daemon Infinitum. The Inquisitor spoke softly, as one might to a child or a bomb. "You burn in ways we cannot catalogue. You are no warp spawn, yet the warp bows to your presence. Explain yourself." The rider lifted his skull, fire pulsing behind hollow sockets. "I am judgment." "Then you are not unique," the Inquisitor replied. "This Imperium is built on judgment." The chain rattled once, like laughter. "Yours is bureaucracy," he said. "Mine is balance." The Inquisitor circled him, hands clasped behind his back. Servo skulls hovered, recording. Tech priests in attendance mumbled canticles, afraid to look directly at the burning thing in their midst. The nulls at the edge of the room swayed slightly, nauseated by his mere existence. "You are not of chaos," the Inquisitor mused, "but you are no creation of the Emperor either. What throne forged your curse?" Ghost Rider said nothing. The Inquisitor's voice hardened. "Speak, or I will strip it from you." "You cannot," the rider said, voice a furnace hum. "You can peel flesh, you can shatter bone, but what I am," he leaned forward, the runes screaming in protest, "was made from sin itself. Try to unmake that." The Inquisitor's expression did not change. "I have unmade worlds for less." He gestured, and the tech priests activated the psi wards. Blue fire exploded across the chamber, his own fire turned inward. The wards inverted it, folding hellfire into a cage of psychic static. His own energy began to tear at him, gnawing at the core of what he was. He didn't scream. He couldn't. His voice was the fire, and it was being devoured. The Inquisitor stepped closer, raising a device shaped like a cross between a reliquary and a weapon. Inside, something golden pulsed faintly, a shard of the Emperor's psychic light, contained, consecrated, and weaponized. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. The rider's silence was answer enough. "This relic can burn demons to atoms," the Inquisitor said softly. "But it does not simply kill them, it asks them questions they cannot bear to answer." He pressed it against the rider's skull. The fire turned white. It was no longer a room. no longer a man, no longer a soul. He saw memory itself flayed open the moment Mephisto had marked him, the first soul he condemned, the first innocent he burned in error. He saw all the mortals who had begged for mercy, and all the times he had denied it, because justice demanded otherwise. And behind them, always watching, always amused, the fire itself. Not a demon, not a god. Something colder, something that wanted not to punish sin, but to observe it forever. He understood then. Even his vengeance had been someone's experiment. The relic's voice was the Emperor's will translated into geometry. It did not ask, "Who are you?" It asked, "Whose truth do you serve?" He tried to resist, but the fire flickered. "None," he said. The relic flared brighter. "You must belong. Everything belongs, even gods. Then I will burn the ones who claim me." The relic dimmed, uncertain. Even sanctified light does not understand defiance without anger. When he opened his eyes again, the Inquisitor was watching him from a distance. The relic smoked in his hand, its casing cracked, golden light leaking like blood. "You survived," the Inquisitor said quietly. "You should not have." "I do not survive," the rider rasped. "I endure. There's a difference." The Inquisitor stared for a long moment, then unexpectedly bowed his head, just slightly. "I have interrogated daemons, psychers, saints, and traitors. All of them screamed in either pride or terror. You do neither. What are you afraid of?" The rider's flame pulsed, whispering like breath. "That one day there will be no sin left to burn, and I will have nothing left to prove I existed." For the first time, the Inquisitor's eyes softened barely. In that instant, he did not see a daemon, but a reflection. Another tool forged by something greater, made to serve purpose without permission. "You speak of sin as though it is fuel," the Inquisitor said. "It is," the rider replied. "You just burn yours differently." A tremor shook the sanctum. The candles flared. The nulls collapsed, screaming not in pain, but because the silence broke. The wards flickered like dying constellations. Something was coming. The Inquisitor looked up at the ceiling. "Impossible," he whispered. "We are beneath 500 meters of ferrocrete and sanctified steel." Then he saw it. A crimson fissure ripping through the stone like a mouth forming a word too blasphemous for sound. The warp had found them. Or rather, it had followed him. Ghost Rider raised his head. "Your cage called to it," he said. "You wanted to trap hellfire. Now you've invited it." From the crack-poured shapes daemons, not of chaos, but of inversion. They had come not to serve, but to study, drawn to the paradox that should not exist, a soul of vengeance that could not be corrupted. The Inquisitor drew his blade, the relic now useless. "Then we die clean." "No," the rider said. "You die informed." He pulled against the chains once, twice. Then the iron shattered like guilt in sunlight. The demons surged. The Inquisitor's men opened fire, hymns blaring through vox. The air turned into scripture written in bullets and screams. The rider stood in the middle, chains ablaze, the wards burning symbols of surrender. He unleashed the penance stare one last time in that chamber. The daemons saw what they were and screamed themselves into nothing. The tech priests saw the cost of their devotion and wept oil. The Inquisitor saw himself kneeling before gods who demanded obedience and called it virtue. When it was done, the sanctum was silent again. Only the rider and the Inquisitor remained. The latter sat against the ruined throne, bleeding, armor cracked. Ghost Rider looked down at him. "Still think I'm a daemon?" The Inquisitor exhaled, voice faint but firm. "No, something worse, something human." He smiled faintly, grimly, then closed his eyes. The rider turned, flame reflecting in the cracked relic still glowing on the floor. "Then perhaps there's hope," he murmured. He mounted the hell cycle. The engine reignited, fed not by fuel, but by will. The walls of the sanctum began to melt as he rode upward through stone, through sanctity, through sin. And the warp followed, hungry to know what it had failed to own. He rode upward through the sanctum's collapsing throat. Stone forgetting its vows, iron recanting its catechism. And the rift followed like hunger that had learned to walk. The hell cycle did not so much climb as decide that higher existed. Every meter he gained burned a rung into a ladder no architect had drawn. The air was incense, ash, and the grammar of panic. Below, the Inquisitor's survivors dragged their doctrine into firing lines. Above, the hive's arteries pumped sirens and smoke like a liturgy of alarm. Between those two engines, faith and fear, ghost flame cut a third road. He broke into open night. The sky wore wounds. Rents of crimson and bruised purple veined the firmament, as if the planet's atmosphere had been stitched with wire and then pulled too tight. From those rents, shapes descended, curious, derisive, affectionate, the way vivisections are affectionate. The warp had come not as an army, but as an audience. He let the hell cycle idle, a low thunder under his bones. "Look," he said, "to no one and to everything, if you must." The nearest tear flared, and reality blinked. A choir of eyes opened across the sky like lanterns being lit down a cathedral aisle. Each eye was a question that forgot to wait for answers. They studied him the way scholars study a plague, with joy. "You survived their light," the warp cooed, voice thick with 1,000 politely smiling mouths. "You survived their iron. Survive us if your meaning permits it." "Meaning," he replied, "is how you bribe cowards." He opened his hand. Hellfire bled from his palm in a slow, steady pour, no roar, no flourish. A candle at a wake. The flame pooled in the air as if the world had a flaw there, then climbed itself in a helix, link by link, becoming a chain of light suspended in nothing. The chain did not swing. It waited. Daemons gathered the way wealth gathers, by assuming its place is natural. Slaneshi things glided nearer, the angle of their smiles instructive. Scientian geometries unfurled, feathers made of ideas. Nurgle's patient diplomats brought gifts of inevitability. Cornate scouts checked the wind for permission to call this a battlefield. Ghost Rider lifted his skull and let the pennant stare open, not as weapon, but as window. It showed the warp itself to itself. Pleasure saw the moment it became anesthetic. Change saw the ledger beneath its magic tricks. Rot saw love that had curdled into excuses. Rage saw orders printed on skin like tattooed alibis. The sky shuddered. Not retreat, recognition. "Ah," breathed 1,000 throats. "A mirror that burns. How novel. How rude." "Not novel," he said. "Not rude. Necessary." The chain brightened until blue shaded toward colorless. Around each link, runes appeared, not written by any priest, not learned from any grimoire, but revealed like grain in wood. He wrapped that chain around his forearm, as if performing an oath in a court that had never been built. The warp pressed closer anyway. A navigator's ship far above one of the Inquisition's escorts screamed along its keel as the Empyrean leaned on it like a bored god flattening a toy. The Astronomican's far rumor rolled over the hive in a sterilized dawn that could not reach the ground. Men on parapets knelt, eyes bleeding at a light they had not earned. Ghost Rider ignored heaven. He was speaking to the storm. "You want my fire to choose a color," he said. "It won't. It burns names off things." The nearest Daemon Lord smiled amiably, as if at a dinner. "Everything picks a side, Judge, even silence." "Then call me silence that laughs." He twisted the throttle. The engine answered in the register where cathedrals learn humility. Hellfire surged up his spine and down the chain in a wash that was not heat. Heat is mortal. This was permission revoked. It met the first wave. They did not die spectacularly. That is theater, and the warp is a museum. They simply ceased to pretend they were more than habits. A courtesan of impossible angles collapsed into the flinches that had made her. A scholar bird shed all but the thesis that had ruined its master. A plague father fell away from his love the way lies fall away from a sobriquet. The rift did not close. It narrowed out of courtesy. "Curious," the storm admitted. "You refuse our scripts without writing your own. Are you trying to be useful, Rider?" "I am trying to be correct." A pause, respectful and malicious at once. "Then be examined." The world flipped its arithmetic. Up became memory, down became motive, distance became if. His flame guttered to a thin wire across nothing. Along that wire they sent himself Johnny with flesh, Johnny with contract signed in shaky hope, Johnny laughing the first time the chain obeyed, Johnny weeping when he learned that righteousness has accountants. The wire hummed under the weight. The hell within him, which had no proper name because names flatter proprietors, tightened to a dot the size of loyalty. He did not fight the images. He itemized them, stamped them, archived them in boxes labeled true and also true. The wire thickened. He files his sins, the warp whispered, delighted, an auditor of grief. I balance ledgers, he said, including yours. He cast the chain outward into the tear, not to bind it, but to define its edge. Boundaries are insults the warp rarely forgives. The tear spasmed. Daemons hissed in cut-glass harmonies. A thing wearing constellations like jewelry put its hand through the helix and recoiled as if stung by a small god with excellent manners. Blue fire became white, then quiet. The quiet had weight. It settled across the hive like verdict dust. Men looked up, expecting salvation, and found instead the possibility of an honest day. They did not know what to do with it. Above, the escort ship's navigator blinked and realized the screaming had gone into a different room. Ghost Rider retracted the chain. The tear's lips trembled, offended, then steadied around the hole he had made in its confidence. You can watch, he said to the sky. You can never own. The storm considered pettiness and chose sophistication. Very well, it said, like a host conceding a point at cards. Keep your orthodoxy of one. We'll make do with empires. But indulge us a technical question, What burns you, Judge, when there is nothing left but your own criteria? He answered by looking at the city. The hive's tears were aflame in all the familiar ways. Manufactoria venting penance, scholar dormitories purging rumor, noble decks shedding debt like sparks. Vox sirens coughed catechism through the taste of blood. From a spire top, Aquilus stared with double astonishment at guilt and at fire that would not become anyone's flag. I burn the exemption, he said softly. The clause that says the powerful are paperwork. The warp liked that. Liking is how it marks targets for later. Then we will bring you exemptions large enough to use as continents. See you soon. The eyes went out one by one, like a procession extinguishing candles after a mass that had not converted anyone but had sold many souvenirs. The rifts loosened. The sky remembered that black is a color and exhaled. The world resumed gravity. He aimed the hell cycle down. Rooftops rushed to meet him the way confessions rush to ears that cannot forgive. He landed hard enough to make buttresses consider socialism, then accelerated along a parapet where saints were ribbed with rebar. Below, the city had heard a rumor that the storm had blinked. Rumors can be weapons. This one became marching orders. Cults that had been whisper rose to shout. PDF lines wavered along the seam where orders meet tiredness. Somewhere, a preacher decided to call the reprieve a miracle. Somewhere else, a child decided to call it luck. He cut a path between both. The Inquisitor intercepted him on a sky bridge made of formal apologies welded into a road. Armor scorched, blade nicked, rosette still heavy enough to require two consciences to lift. You provoked it, he said without preamble. Not accusation, categorization. I corrected it, the rider answered. You defined it, the Inquisitor said, and looked up, visor reflecting a sky that was pretending to be innocent. I have seen blanks bend demons. I have seen saints humiliate them. I have never seen a fire set a rule. Ghost Rider rolled the throttle in a shrug. Call it a courtesy I refuse to extend twice. The Inquisitor's head tilted consideration, not surrender. Then let us weaponize your discourtesy, he said. There is a cathedral of heresy blooming in the sump. A cult has found courage. Your stunt made them think they can negotiate with their god. Good, the rider said. Negotiations need a judge. They stood a moment longer, two magistrates from incompatible courts, recognizing the other's burden. The Inquisitor sheathed the blade with ceremony quick enough to prove it was habit. He pointed toward the hive's foundations, where the planet sweated and rumors dripped from pipes. Go, he said. Burn what asks to be burned. Leave the rest to my accountants. The rest, the rider said, is always where you hide the crime. The hell cycle leapt the gap. The sky bridge hummed with relief. Below, the hive opened like a confession booth, with too many doors. He descended through tiers of smoke and psalm until the air learned to crawl, and the lights decided they were tired of being seen. There, in the sump's black cathedral, he felt it. Not a god, a business plan. A cult organizing fear into tithe, tithe into power, power into permission. He smiled without lips. Time, he told the dark, to audit. The flame narrowed to a clean, surgical line. And the warp, far above, tilted its head, amused and irritated in equal measure. It had found a novelty that refused to become a pet. It would try again, with larger gifts and sharper teeth. But for now, it watched the skull on the bike dive into the wound and conceded a sentence very few ever earned. For the moment, Judge, we will stay out of your way. The sump was a world within a world. Beneath the hive's sacred spires, beneath the manufactoria that bled prayers into steel, there lay an empire of rot and steam, a continent of forgotten machinery and abandoned faith. Here, the Emperor's light had never reached. Here, the word salvation was written only in oil and blood. Ghost Rider entered it like a verdict, descending into a confession booth. His fire dimmed as if in respect for the darkness. The hell cycle's roar echoed off rusted pylons, shaking loose the bones of the faithful long gone. Every sound felt like a trespass. Every breath carried history that no one wanted to claim. This was where sin slept and dreamed. They called it the Cult of Reversal. A congregation of heretics and engineers, broken psychers, and failed saints. They worshipped not chaos, not the Emperor, but the idea that all sin, if repeated enough, became virtue. Their creed was simple. If pain brings understanding, then let us understand everything. They had built a cathedral from scavenged parts of Titans and starship hulls, its architecture defying gravity and good taste. Wires replaced stained glass. Candles flickered with psychic flame. The altar was a reactor core, pulsing like the heart of a god being dissected alive. Ghost Rider dismounted at the base of its stairs. The stone was warm not from heat, but from attention. The warp watched here. The city had forgotten this place, but reality had not. He walked forward, the chain dragging sparks behind him. At the top of the stairs waited a priest or something that had once been one. Half his body was flesh, the other half, circuitry. His eyes glowed red, not from implants but from faith that had found electricity to be more obedient than angels. "We know what you are," the priest said. "You burn away illusion. You think yourself pure flame, but even light casts shadows. Will you see yours?" Ghost Rider tilted his skull. "I've seen worse." "No," the priest whispered, smiling. "You've seen others, never your own." The congregation parted. Behind the priest stood a machine, a sphere of adamantium covered in glyphs, glowing with warp light. It hummed with something not quite sound, not quite thought. Psychers knelt around it, chanting through bleeding throats. The priest extended his hand. "Step into the reversal engine. Spirit, let your fire illuminate your origin. If you are truth, it cannot harm you." It was a trap, but traps are merely truths told by cowards. Ghost Rider stepped forward. The moment his fire touched the sphere, it bloomed. Light folding inward, sound vanishing, time rearranging itself into confession. He was no longer standing. He was falling through visions his own, and not his own. He saw Earth. Not the polluted corpse it would become under the Imperium, but a memory, his memory. Streets wet with rain, a motorcycle beneath him, the wind carrying the scent of gasoline and regret. Johnny Blaze. He saw Mephisto, smiling behind 1,000 faces. He saw the first soul he burned, a murderer who begged for forgiveness and the hesitation that never returned. He saw the centuries between worlds, his curse stretching through dimensions like a shadow that refused to die. Then, the vision split. He saw the warp, vast and sentient, laughing at hell for thinking it was unique. He saw Mephisto bargaining with daemons of chaos, selling pieces of reality like real estate. He saw that the line between hell and the warp was thinner than a prayer. Both fed on the same thing, the human need for justice that never comes. "You thought yourself independent," a voice whispered. "You are fuel from another engine. You are borrowed vengeance wearing flesh." "Then, who owns me now?" he asked. The answer came as laughter, and in that laughter he heard it all. The laughter of Khorne when the first man killed for love. The laughter of Tsinch when the first prayer was answered incorrectly. The laughter of Slanesh when silence became unbearable. The laughter of Nurgle when decay learned patience. No one owns you, Rider. Ownership is the joke. You are free to destroy because destruction serves us all. The flame flickered. For a single heartbeat, he saw himself as they did. Not a judge, but a maintenance worker in an infinite system of punishment. An unpaid employee in the bureaucracy of despair. And in that heartbeat, he almost believed them. Then came another sound, the low growl of his hell cycle. The chain pulsed, alive, angry, loyal. He clenched his fist, and the vision shattered. The reversal engine exploded, tearing the cathedral in half. Psychers were vaporized in a halo of their own thoughts. The priest staggered backward, eyes smoking, flesh peeling away in ribbons. Ghost Rider stepped from the flames, the reversal engine's wreckage glowing like a sun behind him. "You wanted my truth," he said. "Now burn in it." The priest fell to his knees, weeping blood. "You don't understand," the engine spoke. "It saw what you are. You're not human, you're not daemon, you're the correction. The thing the universe sends when rules stop working." The rider paused, the flame around him dimming to a steady, holy glow. For the first time, he felt no rage, only purpose. Then it's time the rules learned fear. He turned and saw the Inquisitor standing at the shattered doorway, blade drawn, coat torn, armor smeared with soot and faith. They stared at each other through the smoke. "So," the Inquisitor said quietly, "you really do serve no master." "Serve?" Ghost Rider said, voice a quiet thunder. "No," I remind. The Inquisitor stepped closer, sheathing his sword. "The warp retreats wherever you walk. Chaos recoils. Even the ecclesiarchy will hear of this. But they will not call you savior. They will call you contagion." "Then let them," the rider said. "Truth always looks like infection to liars." Outside, the hive was collapsing under its own theology. Cults burned, soldiers mutinied, vox channels filled with prayers and screams in equal measure. The Inquisitor turned his gaze to the rising flames. "You've unmade balance, Rider. You've shown them judgment that doesn't kneel. The galaxy will react. Then let it." The hell cycle roared to life, molten lines crawling along its frame. The flames reflected in the Inquisitor's visor, two suns rising in a world that deserved none. He mounted the bike and looked once more at the man of faith. "You asked me once what I am, I'll tell you now." The ground cracked beneath the wheels as the hell cycle lifted, ascending on a column of pure fire. "I'm not vengeance, I'm the audit." He broke through the roof of the hive and into the void, the city shrinking beneath him like a wound finally cauterized. Behind him, the warp still boiled but slower now, uncertain. The eyes of daemons watched from beyond, learning a new emotion: hesitation. The Inquisitor watched him vanish into the storm, whispering a prayer that wasn't in any liturgy. "Emperor, forgive us if we ever try to stop him." He felt the summons before it had the courtesy to become light. Not a call, a decision. Space went careful, time tucked in its corners. The hell cycle's engine dropped into a reverent idle it had never learned. Gravity remembered, it was only a suggestion. Then the darkness in front of him turned the color of gold after too many wars, not bright, but stubborn. The Astronomicon did not appear. It arrived a horizon with opinions. Its radiance was neither warmth nor mercy. It was a rule written so large ships could navigate the consequences. His hellfire, which did not bow to altars, did not bow to this either. It merely narrowed, the way a blade narrows at the point that matters. A voice that was not voice reviewed him. "You burn without liturgy." He answered without speaking. "Words are smoke in rooms like this. I burn what lies to itself." The gold thickened until it acquired geometry, a mile-high rose whose petals were commandments, a tower of bones that insisted it was light, a throne you could not look at without learning something you did not want. He hovered in its shadow and felt a familiar ache, the ache of witnessing a verdict that believes it is exempt from being witnessed. The Emperor's will examined him the way a star examines comets, final, impartial, and uninterested in apologies. He was not alone. On the periphery of that unbearable dawn, shadows wore armor that refused embellishment. Custodians, They were not present as men, but as functions. Guardianship distilled until it forgot to breathe. One presence stepped forward in the way mountains step forward by letting you notice how long they have been standing. Entity, the custodian said, each syllable sanded by 1,000 oaths. Identify. Ghost Rider's skull inclined, a courtly gesture rude only by definition. Judge, he said. Judgment is the throne's monopoly, the custodian replied. No heat, only logistics. Monopolies, the rider said, breed black markets. The Astronomicon brightened by a degree only distances could measure. The custodian's helm turned a fraction, reassessing the size and flavor of blasphemy. You wound the sea, came the golden pressure, the emperor's will phrased as weather. And yet you are not its enemy. I am not its meal, he returned. Silence, not emptiness, concentration. Across 100,000 light-years, navigators blinked and looked aside without knowing why. The galaxy's lighthouse blinked, then held, then interrogated itself for the indulgence. The will pressed closer. His fire leaned away on reflex, the way soldiers lean when inspecting officers pass. He did not let it lean far. What court minted you? None, he said. Then, who authored your verdicts? Everyone who thought their sin was a sacrament. Gold deepened. A suggestion of stairs congealed out of certainty, ascending toward a brightness that would have scolded a god into modesty. The custodian indicated the first step. Approach, he said. It was not an order that expected refusal. It was a geography lesson. Ghost Rider did not dismount. He advanced in his own language. Throttle. The hell cycle climbed the nothing as if the air had finally conceded it was a road. Each meter closer subtracted lies. He felt earlier selves lift from him like ash from a lit page. The stuntman who mistook risk for faith. The penitent who thought pain validated choices. The executioner who called habit mission. He allowed each to go. He kept the ledger. At the sixth step, the number did not matter. Numbers are moods in temples. The pressure changed. The will stopped being interrogatory and became archival. His life unspooled into the catalogue of a civilization that files even its screams. He watched the Emperor's library make a folder for him. Rider, Ghost Auxiliary, Hazard, Anomaly. The tab cut itself with immaculate disdain. You refuse indoctrination, the gold observed. You refuse recruitment by the adversary as well. This suggests inefficiency. Or accuracy, he said. A second presence touched the edge of the light. Not a person, a cost. The sound of 10,000 psychers ending politely. The taste of thrown metal salted by a species' fear. He felt the calculation that turns mercy into policy. We suffer to make paths for the weak to suffer less. The sentence was true, and terrible, and proud. Then count me as a path the strong cannot privatize, he said. The custodian stepped fully into the argument, blade unsheathed not for threat but for grammar. Your flame humiliated the sea, that service is noted. Your flame unhouses cults that our hammers would otherwise spend a decade accounting for. That efficiency is seductive. He paused. But your flame also judges us. Everything that judges is under judgment, the rider replied. The will's light did not flicker. It remembered an old doctrine from before there were armies to abuse it, that sovereignty without audit becomes idolatry spelled with uniforms. You could feel the memory try to stand, then politely sit back down for the sake of continuity. You will be pointed, the gold declared. Not asked, announced. There are worlds where verdict is overdue. The words were not a leash, they were a map. Sectors flowered in the air like wounds. A shrine planet where indulgences were farmed like grain, a shipyard that crucified orphans as rivets of morale, a black ship captain who had learned to enjoy quotas. The will did not apologize for any of it. It appointed. He did not promise. He nodded the acknowledgement one judge gives another when docket math happens to align. Pointing is not possession, he said. The custodian considered him with the courtesy owed a weapon that has memorized the hand that might hold it. Refuse, and we will still hunt you. Accept, and we will still hunt you. There is no arrangement in which you are not adversarial to someone holy. Good, he said. Holiness that fears mirrors should close its eyes. The blade did not move. The man behind it did. Barely. Approval is a currency in palaces like this. The custodian spent a coin thinner than pride. The will dimmed by a fraction, the kind of concession a continent makes to a single lantern. Then it brightened again, as systems recovered their posture. Across Terra, across the fleet light, a million clerks felt a chill and assumed it was the air. One condition, the gold insisted: do not touch the light. He looked up at the Tower of Commandments, at the scream woven into a beam, at the divine corpse kept polite by machines. The pity that had no place in him made a small, pure sound, and then went silent out of respect for the dead. "I will not touch your light," he said. "I will only show those who steal it what their hands look like." The will accepted the phrasing the way a judge accepts a plea, with paperwork. Gold thin to weather. The stairs forgot they had ever been necessary. The custodian stepped back into his assignment, the way mountains step back into horizon. "Rider," he said, the title for once, not tactical. "If you come to the palace, there are places even your fire cannot walk." "If I come to the palace," the skull replied, "it will be because your law asked for a reason." They regarded each other across an abyss, engineered to prevent exactly this kind of mutual recognition. Then the moment closed like a vault satisfied with inventory. The hell cycle snarled as gravity remembered its job. Stars resumed being far. The Astronomicon flowed outward into its work, a spine of light holding a species at parade rest. He turned from it without kneeling. The summons released him the way a sentence releases air from the lungs that carried it. He fell back into ordinary black. The fleet waited like a set of teeth. Vox choruses resolved into comprehensible threats. On the nearest blade-shaped ship, a choirmaster raised a hand for the downbeat of extermination. He landed on a gun deck before the gesture completed. Bolter crews flinched. Priests reached for oils that had worked yesterday. His fire bled none of the gold. It was still the blue of a contract remembered and refused. He raised one hand and let a single spark fall. It formed a seal on the deck, no icon, no aquila, no sigil authored by any office. A plain circle, an audit mark. "Not this world," he said. "Not today." The choirmaster hesitated. He had never practiced uncertain. Somewhere behind him, in a chapel that smelled like metal and panic, the ship's astropath felt an instruction arrive without words. "Stand down to see what happens." He relayed it, trembling with the weird intoxication of obedience that felt like thought. Guns powered down. The sky over the hive stopped pretending to be a verdict and returned to being merely weather promising cruelty later. He stepped off the deck and let the void accept him. The hell cycle spun beneath him, caught him, loved him with the affection only tools and animals perfect. Below, sirens modulated into bureaucratic relief. Above, the lighthouse pretended nothing had happened, because lighthouses have reputations to maintain. He rode. The galaxy opened maps it had been saving for men who don't ask permission. Faiths and diseases, saints and ledgers, shrines and slaughterhouses all came into range. He selected a vector not because it was dramatic, but because somebody there had written a rule they thought no one would read. "Point away," he said to the invisible court that wanted to be useful. "I'll decide when the case rests." The engine agreed. He angled toward the dark between sectors, where exemptions congregate like nobles and laws go thin as sermons spoken to empty rooms. The light behind him did not dim. It watched as all judges do when someone else volunteers to keep the docket honest. He did not wave. He accelerated until the stars smeared. The void does not echo. It remembers. Every scream, every detonation, every prayer that died before it was finished. They do not fade, they accumulate. Ghost Rider rode through that accumulation, trailing a wake of blue fire that refused to be reflected. His hell cycle left a line in the dark, not of light, but of truth. Ships in distant sectors reported sensor interference. Astropaths dreamed of mirrors and flinched at their own reflections. Even the warp currents bent a fraction to avoid him, as though embarrassed to be seen. For the first time, judgment had become cosmic. He arrived at the shrine world of Veneris, a planet once covered entirely by cathedrals and sanctuaries. Now, it was a graveyard of marble and bureaucracy. Pilgrims no longer came for faith, they came for indulgences, stamped and sold by priests who had long forgotten why forgiveness mattered. The Emperor's face had been carved on every coin, every wall, every heart. He descended through its thin atmosphere like a meteor that had chosen a side. The hive below was celebrating Absolution Day. Fireworks screamed prayers into the smog. Confessors sold repentance by the liter. And in the center, a basilica built from bones of titans rang its great bell to signal the beginning of the Feast of Mercy. Ghost Rider landed before the basilica's gates. The bell stopped. For one terrible heartbeat, the world listened. Then the priests emerged, robes gold and red, censers swinging, eyes empty from repetition. "Identify," one barked, voice cracking through an amplifier. "Identify or burn." "I'm here to balance the books," he said. They opened fire. Bolter rounds screamed across the courtyard. The first dozen disintegrated before touching him, metal confessing its sins mid-flight. The rest turned to vapor as hellfire met sanctified air. He advanced without haste. Judgment does not run. When he reached the steps, he raised one hand. The penance stare unfurled. It did not kill them, it educated them. Each priest saw himself standing at the moment of his first lie, the day he learned that faith could be monetized, that confession could be taxed. They saw the children they denied mercy to, the outcasts they condemned to maintain the illusion of purity. They saw that they had called cruelty order. When the light dimmed, they fell not dead, but converted into something more honest, silent. He entered the basilica. Inside was noise made of faith. Choirs of servo skulls sang hymns in binary. Statues wept blood by design. The floor was a mosaic of execution scenes, each tile depicting one more necessary sacrifice. At the altar stood Cardinal Veyron, a man so covered in relics he had become one himself. His armor was gold leaf over sin. His crozier was made from the femur of a saint who had once doubted him. He raised it now, trembling with a mixture of awe and hatred. "Daemon," he said, "you dare defile the Emperor's domain? I dare correct it." The rider answered, "You burn the pious. I burn the liars who wear piety to hide their appetite. Then you will burn forever. So be it." Veyron screamed an invocation. The altar split open, revealing a containment chamber below an artifact chained in stasis. A pulsing sphere of liquid light, throbbing like a heart, weeping radiance into the air. "The Emperor's echo," Veyron shouted, a fragment of his will drawn from the Astronomicon itself, pure judgment, pure flame. He smashed the seals. The echo exploded into the chamber, consuming everything. Walls melted, choirs disintegrated, the sphere expanded until it swallowed him whole. He felt it tear through his flame, testing every molecule, interrogating every reason. "You claim judgment," it thundered. "Prove it." Ghost Rider fell to his knees, not from pain, but from recognition. This was the same light that had spoken through the throne, the same authority that kept humanity balanced on the knife edge of annihilation. And it was asking him a question. "You punish sin without scale, you destroy without metric. Who judges you?" He lifted his head, flame flaring against gold. "Every soul I've ever burned," he said. "They are my jury. I ride inside their verdicts." "Then what of mercy?" He laughed, a sound like rust on thunder. "Mercy is what cowards call justice when it costs too much. Then you are chaos in disguise." "No," he said. "Chaos wants worship. I want receipts." The light hesitated. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's echo paused mid-prosecution. Not because it was defeated, but because it recognized something unfamiliar, truth spoken without hope. The basilica was dissolving into photons. Pilgrims fled in every direction, prayers melting on their tongues. Ghost Rider stood amid the destruction, his fire and the Emperor's light warring in silence. And then, they stopped fighting. The echo folded inward, compressing until it became a sphere no larger than a man's heart. It hovered before his chest, pulsing. The flames around him leaned toward it, like worshippers before revelation. He reached out. The moment his hand touched it, the light turned black, not in corruption, but in completion. It had found its opposite, and in doing so, became whole. For an instant, the cosmos shuddered. Across the warp, Daemons screamed without knowing why. Across Terra, the Astronomicon flickered. Across distant fleets, Sensors recorded a spike of impossible radiation classified immediately as heresy. And in the basilica's ruin, Ghost Rider stood reborn, half golden light, half infernal fire, every boundary erased. He was no longer the servant of hell, nor a toy of the warp. He was now something the universe had not accounted for, the accountant of both. When he left Veneris, the world was silent. The basilica no longer existed. The cults, the armies, the priests, they were gone. Only ash in the shape of prayers remained. Above, the sky shone clear for the first time in centuries. From orbit, Imperial ships scanned the surface. No daimonic signature, no corruption, just equilibrium. The Inquisitor, still aboard his vessel, eyes hollow from sleepless doctrine, watched the readings in silence. Then he whispered, "What did you become?" The vox crackled. "Balance." The channel died. He rode into the dark between stars again, slower this time. The echo pulsed within his chest, not as a voice, but as understanding. For the first time, the fire did not speak. It listened, and what it heard was nothing. Not peace, not chaos, just stillness. He looked out upon the stars, the Emperor's work, the warp's playground, humanity's graveyard, and whispered a promise. "I will burn until silence becomes sacred." The Hell Cycle's engine ignited, blue and gold intertwining like equal confessions. Behind him, the ashes of a shrine world floated into space, tracing his path across eternity like punctuation at the end of an unfinished prayer. There are roads you can draw on a map, and there are roads that appear only when a will insists on moving. He took the second kind. Between constellations and decrees, past patrol lines and psalms, through shipping lanes where guilt traveled under convoy, the Hell Cycle traced a thread, no chart admitted. The engine no longer roared like a rebellion. It worked, steady as a vow. Blue fire braided with a faint, stubborn gold, the quiet account of every choice he refused to let the galaxy forget. They began to call him names that weren't insults or prayers but procedures. The Midnight Auditor. The balance on burning wheels. The fire that files. He did not answer to any of them. He rode. On Tessella Prime, a forge world whose tithe quotas had replaced seasons, the Omnissiah's ledger hung above the planetary shrine like a second moon. It displayed production figures to 8 decimal places and casualties to none. When the alarms keened for a shift change that never yielded daylight, he arrived. No speeches, no spectacle. He marked a circle in slag at the base of the central crane cathedral, the same featureless seal he left on a gun deck when guns reconsidered their enthusiasm. Engines hiccuped. The machine spirit paused, not in fear, but in interest, as if a new instruction had arrived written in the grammar of fairness. Tech priests gathered, cogitators clicking like teeth. "Identify," one intoned. "Function." "Correction," he said. One word, and the foundries listened. Output resumed with every numeral intact except the ones that counted lives. Those now appeared, bright and indelible, beside each line of yield. Every servo skull that doled the figures in incense was forced to chant both numbers. Nothing exploded. No one burned. A week later, without orders, a shift ended early and did not make it up later. Balance had become contagious. He did not stay to be thanked or hunted. He rode. On the pilgrim barge, Sola Men Gloria, an ecclesiarchy prelate kept a reliquary of tongues, each one taken from a heretic who had dared to speak nuance near a microphone. Sermons echoed from brass lungs. Children sang rote harmonies about mercy that never cost the church anything dear. He appeared at the prow, where statues of saints met the wind like shields. The prelate arrived with escort and incense, rosette glimmering with licenses he had never earned. "You will not audit sanctity," he declared, voice amplified to be louder than the doubt he refused to feel. "Sanctity audits itself," the rider said, and opened the penance stare not at the man but at the reliquary. Tongues remembered the words they had wanted to say the day knives made them pious. A murmuration rose. Bread before doctrine, apology before punishment, love before uniform. It filled the nave. It did not accuse. It persisted. The choir faltered. Children looked at one another, confused by the sudden flavor of choice. The prelate's hands trembled. He tried to order silence. The brass lungs obeyed, then added, in a whisper not routed through any altar, "And now the epistle, from those we punished to keep our jobs." No fire, no riot, merely a vote. Years later, that ship's chapels still held both liturgies, the sanctioned and the brave. He did not collect victories. He rode. Rumor ran ahead of him where ships could not. It carried both threats and hope in the same voice. The galaxy knows no other dialect. In the sump decks of hive worlds, grifters adopted his skull as a stencil to sanctify scams. On nobility decks, artists painted him into portraits as a fashionable liability. The administratum created forms tabulating unscheduled audits by unregistered phenomena, then burned the forms for violating their relationship with ignorance. Chaos tried again. Of course it did. On the war planet Gore Metropolis, cults turned stadiums into altars and citizens into crowds for executions they called games. The drum came back professional as ever. Banners arrived to remind Rage, who wrote its sheet music. The champion who had bowed on the Skull Causeway returned, armor relettered with promotions he had carved out of men. "Rider," he greeted, approval undiminished. "You have been busy." "Incorrect," the Skull replied. "I have been consistent." They fought on sand that was actually powdered law, axe and chain, sermon and counter-sermon, blood writing a language that didn't need verbs. The drum tried to take his wrists and failed. He had learned to keep rhythm without being kept by it. In the end, the champion planted his axe in the ground, not surrender. Etiquette again. "You are the only judge I've met who does not secretly want a crown," he admitted. The rider wound the chain back into silence. "Crowns are heavy because of all the excuses forged into them." The champion laughed, a sound unashamed. "Then we will meet at the next excuse." They would. He rode. He visited places that had never heard of terror. Dead belts where miners tithed by coughing, station cities whose clocks were wrong by utility, research moons where ethics had been turned into paperweights and then forgotten. He never broke what worked. He only burned what pretended. The echo within him did not command, it checked. At worlds where the Emperor's light had been stolen to illuminate private comfort, it grew heavy in his chest. At shrines where exhausted people did patient good without microphones, it grew quiet and warm, like a hand that remembers why it was held. Sometimes the Inquisitor arrived late, with nulls and warrants, and a blade that had learned reluctant respect. Their conversations shortened. "Not this one," the rider would say, Mark already cooling on a plaza where executions had been replaced with unglamorous trials. "Agreed," the Inquisitor would answer, which is a large word in a small mouth. "What about the next?" "Bring me numbers." "I will bring you names." "Bring both." They never shook hands, because this is not that kind of legend. But the distance between their silences narrowed. Time did not pass for him the way it passes for men who need birthdays to prove they were here. He rode until starfields changed the way old uniforms change officers. Across that unbeautiful span, a second rumor matured in the places too tired to perpetuate the first. It said he had learned to leave as carefully as he arrived. On Penance Station Karth, he found a warden who recorded confessions and sold them in luxury markets as pornography with a theological footnote. He did not burn the station. He hung the warden's own archive on the public vox, unedited, unanointed. The station's lawless quadrant held its first election not because anyone believed in voting, but because no one could bear the sound of hearing themselves nightly without doing something. On Fallow 3, a moon where shock troops practiced pacification on peasantry, too poor to be called rebels, he dismounted and put the chain away. He walked field to field, turning irrigation spigots by hand, 1 kilometer at a time, until irrigation became a habit again, and drills lost recruits to water. No enemies, no miracles, just work. He knew it would not last. He made it last long enough for one child to think adulthood might hold a calendar that wasn't written in fear. That was sufficient. Then the call came, not words, not gold, not hunger, numbers. An imbalance so large it announced itself as weather across systems, ships disappearing in navigation errors, astropath choruses thinning to soloists overnight, shrine worlds reporting a sudden shortage of candles because light had gone uninteresting. He traced it to a black ship that had forgotten its purpose. No, not forgotten. Optimized. Quotas met early. Suffering wrapped in efficiency. Souls harvested clean, without mess, like wheat by a new machine that sells itself as humane. He arrived on its dorsal spine as it prepared to translate into the sea. Astropaths felt him like a cold breeze under a door. Arbitrators stumbled as paperwork confessed to itself. The captain, a woman with perfect posture and empty sleep, came to the command dais and found a circle burned into the glass under her feet. "Identify," she began. "Stop," he said. "We cannot. Trajectory, schedule, authorization." He raised a hand. He did not open the stair. He stood. Every compartment on that ship filled with mirrors that no one else could see. Quiet ones, polite ones. They did not show crimes. They showed habits. The Medicae who had stopped asking names. The sergeant who had outsourced mercy to policy. The junior adept who signed every form and told herself she would rebel when promoted. The captain blinked. For the first time in years, a file labeled First Oath opened in her skull the day she joined to keep monsters from eating villages, not because numbers were soothing. The ship drifted out of translation range without scandal, without him. Landing logs later called it weather. The cargo children whose gifts frightened them landed, registered, and were treated like citizens under quarantine, not meat under management. One ship is not a system. He knew. He made it one less excuse. He left a circle on the deck, cooling in the air. What of chaos? It did not give up. Seductions rarely do. Once, a masquerade world hired 1,000 actors to pretend to be the people he had burned, to beg him for a scene where forgiveness won. He watched, applauded their technique, and paid them with a contract that listed every real name he still owed attention. The world burned its stages that night, and built clinics in the morning not out of shame, but out of boredom with pretense. Chaos hates boredom more than it hates saints. What of the Emperor's house? It never blessed him. It never could. Blessing is ownership in pretty clothes. But some custodians learned to look away when their patrol lines crossed an audit mark cooling on stone. And at the edge of Holy Terra's sky, a sliver of the Astronomicon flickered exactly once, as if a lighthouse had winked where no sailors could see. He did not go to Terra. Terra would be last, if ever. There came a night that was not a night. Void has only durations when he parked the Hell Cycle on the hull of a derelict cruiser adrift between empires. It had no vox, no shrine, no rumor worth seeding, just quiet metal that had done its job until its job ended it. He listened, not for cries, for silence that had earned the title. The echo within him pulsed once, not as summons or lecture, just as gratitude that someone had taught it, the difference between light and permission. His fire dimmed to a small, disciplined ember. He could have gone cold. He did not. Cold is abdication. Ember is patience. Perhaps, he thought, there will be a dawn when nothing needs burning, when courts learn to walk without whips, when gods tire of recruitment, when ledgers balance themselves because hands refuse to cook the books. If that dawn arrived, he would put the chain away and turn the engine off, and the void would not echo, because there would be nothing to remember except work cleanly done. He stood, an outline of heat against indifferent stars. Until then, he would ride. Not for vengeance, not for worship, not to be a myth swallowed by the gullets of churches and cults. He would ride so that in a galaxy that had learned to call every cruelty policy, there remained at least one moving line that said no, and meant balance. The Hell Cycle answered the only benediction he accepts: ignition. Blue and gold rose from the hull, arced into the black, and vanished down a road that appeared just long enough to be used. Behind him, the cruiser settled deeper into the dark, content to be forgotten by anyone except the ledger. Before him, worlds arranged themselves in the order they would be visited. He did not wave, he did not promise, he did not threaten. He rode, and the void at last felt a little less alone.